welcome to today's meeting of the Planning and Highways Committee. My name is Mike Chaplin. I'm a councillor for Southey Ward and I'm a co-chair or joint chair of this committee. And I'll hand you over to Abby to announce the housekeeping arrangements.
Thank you, Chair. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, please take instruction from staff and stewards. The assembly point is at Tudor Square. Please can I request everyone to switch mobile devices to silent mode so as not to disturb the conduct of the meeting. The meeting today will be webcast and the recording will also be available for people to view later through the Council's website. It is also possible that Sheffield Live TV will record and rebroadcast this meeting. You should be aware that the Council is a data controller under the Data Protection Act. Data collected during this webcast will be retained in accordance with the Council's published policy. By entering the meeting room, you are consenting to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting. While ever the meeting is open to the public, photography, video and sound recording of the proceedings is permitted. However, the Chair has discretion to withdraw or suspend this permission, for example, if the recording is disrupting the conduct of the meeting or is being undertaken in a manner which could capture personal information, or in the event that a member of the public participating in a meeting objects to being recorded. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Abby. I'll now ask each member of the committee to introduce themselves. Alan.
Councillor Alan Woodcock, East Ecclesfield.
Councillor Mary Lee, Darnell Ward.
Councillor Mark Whittaker, Councillor for Stocksbridge and Upper Don. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Councillor Gary Weatherall for Shire Green and Brightside Ward.
Councillor Douglas Johnson, City Ward, substituting today for Councillor Marianne Elliott.
Councillor Henry Nottage for Hillsborough Ward.
Barbara Masters, Councillor for Ecclesfield Ward, substituting for Cliff Woodcroft.
Good afternoon, Councillor Andrew Sanger, Councillor for Forward Ward.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Richard Williams. I represent the Stannington Ward.
Thank you, everyone. Do we have some apologies for absence, Abby?
We do, Chair. So we've had apologies for absence from Councillor Glynis Chapman and her sub is Councillor Richard Williams. We've had apologies from Councillor Tony Downing and his sub is Councillor Mary Lee. We've had apologies from Councillor Marianne Elliott and her sub is Councillor Douglas Johnson. Apologies from Councillor Cliff Woodcraft and his sub is Councillor Barbara Masters, and we've also had apologies from Councillor Janet Ridler and Councillor Case Al-Adal. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. I see there are no, under item 3, exclusion of the public and press, there are no items that require that. Item 4, declarations of interest. Do any members wish to declare an interest in any of the items of business on the agenda?
Item 7A falls within my ward, so I will not be taking part in any voting.
Thank you, Alan. Are there any others? No, I'll take silence to mean no. Item 5, minutes of the previous meeting. You can find on page 9. Are people happy to accept that they are an accurate record? Okay, take the nods and affirmations. Thank you very much. Item 6, the next site visit. The date, as always, to be advised. Although this time will it be on a Monday?
Should be, yeah.
So almost certainly the day before the next meeting of the Planning Committee. Item 7, applications under various acts and regulations. We have one application today. That is item 7A, planning application number 25/02456/full. And that's land adjacent to number 11 Cowley Way, Sheffield S35 1QP. And that's on page 17 of the agenda. Sarah, would you like to present?
Thank you, Chair. This slide shows the red line boundary of the site, which is located at the end of Cowley Way. The M1 is located to the east of the site, and you can see that in blue there on the plan. The site is located within an industry and business park comprising a number of large warehouse-type industrial buildings. Smithy Wood's local wildlife site is to the east, and Smithy Wood, is to the west. East. And Smithy Wood Tip and Blackburn Brook local wildlife sites are to the west of the site. This is an aerial image of the site. You can see those large industrial warehouse buildings surrounding the site, and you can also make out the green infrastructure around the site, so the local wildlife sites to the west and the east of the site, and the open land to the south of the site. This is an image taken looking north up Cowley Way with the site to the rear, and it demonstrates the type and scale of buildings in the immediate locality. This is a photograph taken looking down Cowley Way to the south of the site, with the site being on the right-hand side. I think that might have skipped a few, so I'm just going to go back slightly. Sorry about that. So this is a view looking west towards Grenoside. We're stood on the Blackburn Brook Valley cycle trail here, which connects to the Transpennine Trail further south of the site. The site is located in a high position in the landscape, and it is visible from long-range views. It's just very slow, I think, so there might just be a bit of a pause. So this is stood on the site looking north, and you can see the industrial building to the north of the site, and the site here is characterised by grassland. This is again stood on the site, but looking west out towards Grenoside, and again you can see the grassland habitat. This is looking south on the site, and you can see trees to the left-hand side of the image there, which are category C trees. And then this is an image taken from the cycle path to the west of the site. So the site is on the right-hand side of the image there. This slide indicates the site layout. The development is proposed in 2 phases, and this slide indicates the first phase of development. That includes the laying out of the site and all the hard standing, including access and egress points. And it also includes the suds and drainage and the landscaping scheme. The first phase of development comprises 68 charging bays for light commercial vehicles, and they're located to the north of the site, and the bays are coloured in yellow. It also includes a welfare facility, which is located just to the south of those yellow bays, towards the entrance at the east of the site. It includes 5 staff spaces for that welfare facility and other staff associated with the use. And it also includes a row of 14 HGV spaces, which are located down the western side of the site, which are spaces for electric charging and refuelling with HVO and a canopy above that. There's also associated infrastructure around the site associated with the use, including electricity substations, batteries, and compounds for HVO and AdBlue. This is a layout including the second phase of development, which essentially includes a further 21 HGV bays for recharging and refuelling, and associated infrastructure by virtue of adding hydrogen refuelling and biomethane refuelling options. There's also a truck wash and canopies associated with the HGV spaces. This is a floor plan of the welfare facility. It includes some seating areas and some showers and toilets. And this is the east and west elevations of that welfare facility. So it's a simple contemporary design with gaping walls and flat roof detailing and glazed openings. And this is the north and south elevations of that same welfare building. This image shows the canopy roofs, the first two rows of the charging bays. The canopy includes solar panels to the roof area, and the roofs will also capture rainwater, which will be recycled in the welfare facility building. These are some elevations of the canopies, which are just over 7 metres tall and are a simple functional form. And this is the end elevations of those canopies. So the next few slides show some of the infrastructure and compounds which are located predominantly around the edges of the site. So this one here is the HVO and AdBlue storage and air compressors. This is an image of the hydrogen compound, which is located at the southwest corner of phase 2. This is an image of the truck wash facility, which is located to the east of phase 2. And the battery storage compounds are located at the bottom of the screen there. This is an image of the substations, of which there are 6 in total across both phases of the site. And this is the images of the biomethane refuelling. There's 2 options, the first of which is at the top of the screen, which is approximately 16 metres high, and the other option at the bottom of the screen, which is a lower compound, and that's dependent upon whether that's in a compressed or liquid form. But that would be the highest infrastructure installed on the site, with the rest at a relatively low level. And then this is a landscape plan of the site. So the dark green areas around the south and the west of the site are existing trees which are to be retained. There are some small red incursions where some trees are proposed to be removed. It's not especially clear on that site plan, but those areas of tree loss are minimal. So in terms of the principle of the use, the proposal is for a clean multi-energy hub for commercial vehicles, providing low or zero emission recharging or refuelling for light commercial vehicles and HGVs. It's proposed to be part of a network of clean multi-energy hubs across the country, and it includes electric vehicle charging points and refuelling by HVO, which is hydro-treated vegetable oil, bio-compressed or liquefied natural gas, or hydrogen. The site is within a general industry area in the UDP. Relevant policy states that B2 and B8 uses are preferred in this area. UDP policy IB8 identifies the site as part of an identified business and industrial site where only preferred uses should be allowed, so only B2 or B8 uses. But this policy is very restrictive and therefore carries limited weight. The core strategy identifies the importance of this location for providing for the city's manufacturing, distributing and warehousing needs. The site is within an industrial policy zone in the draft local plan and allocated as part of a larger employment site covering the wider business park in the draft local plan, where B2, B8 and E uses are preferred, although it's highlighted that that local plan has limited weight at present. The proposed use is a sui generis use and so should be assessed on its own merits. Whilst it doesn't directly provide a preferred industrial or business use as set out in the local plan requirements, it will help provide infrastructure which will benefit those uses, and so it can be viewed as a complementary infrastructure use, and it will not harm the dominance of preferred uses in the area. It is highlighted, however, that a negative of the proposal is the low level of employment associated with the use, which would likely be higher if it was within a preferred use. The proposal will comply with relevant policies in the NPPF, which support the overarching aim of promoting environmental sustainability. More specifically, paragraph 87 requires decisions recognise a specific locational requirement for different sectors, including transport, innovation and decarbonisation. The site is near to the M1 and is well placed to provide a strategically located recharging point for commercial vehicles. Paragraph 161 also supports the transitions to net zero and identifies that local planning authorities should support renewable and low carbon energy and infrastructure. On balance, it is considered that the proposal is acceptable in policy terms. In terms of design, the overall design of the proposal is functional. It's led by the highways, infrastructure, parking layout, and other infrastructure around the site, with the key built form being that welfare building. The site is visible from long-range views because it's in an elevated position, but it is seen within the context of existing large functional warehouse and industrial buildings, and therefore it's considered to be appropriate for its context. It's considered necessary to have a condition requiring a sensitive lighting scheme to ensure that the proposal is sensitively lit and therefore not too prominent when viewed from the surrounding area. In terms of landscape, a tree survey has been carried out. It highlights that the majority of the trees are to the edges of the site, particularly to the south and the west, and the majority of those trees are to be retained. Those lost will be young specimens, which are category C specimens, and will be replaced in the landscaping scheme. In terms of BNG and ecology, the site is supported by an ecological impact assessment and several site surveys. The site comprises of rough grassland, scrub, bare ground and non-native scrub, which are common habitat types. The site is close to several local wildlife sites, but not within or immediately bordering. Ancient woodland is located 50 metres to the west of the site, and our ecologists have assessed the proposal and don't consider that there will be unacceptable impacts on the ancient woodland. The site is part of the green network, providing connectivity in the area and between local wildlife sites, and it would reduce the amount of space available for that connectivity. However, the connectivity would still be provided along the site edges and within the local area, which has got a lot of other green spaces which could be used for that connectivity. Surveys have found no evidence of badgers, reptiles or great-crested newts within the site. There is evidence that the site is used by bats for commuting and foraging, but connectivity will still be retained by the trees to the boundaries and within the wider area. And a condition is recommended to ensure that lighting will be sensitive to bats. A breeding bird survey has been submitted and found that the site is mainly used by common birds, with the exception of the skylark, which is a red list species, and one nesting territory was found on site. The proposal would result in the loss of habitat for the skylark, but there are other sites in the area that could be used, and subject to a construction environmental management plan to ensure appropriate working practices, this is not considered to be a barrier for development. The construction environmental management plan will also ensure that best practice working occurs to prevent any impacts on the local wildlife sites and ancient woodland, including dust suppression measures during construction. Overall, there will be a 75% loss of biodiversity on the site. There will be some small amounts of landscaping within the site, but the 10% net gain will need to be achieved through the purchase of off-site units. It would have been preferable to include more biodiversity on the site, but the proposal follows the mitigation hierarchy and is acceptable in terms of policy requirements. In terms of highways, the proposal will result in increased vehicle movements on the local and strategic highways. As part of the draft local plan, it was identified that this site, along with other allocated sites in the area, would increase vehicle movements at junction 35 of the M1, to such an extent that mitigation measures would be required at that junction. And those mitigation measures are identified in the infrastructure development plan associated with the draft local plan. The movements associated with this use are greater than modelled in the local plan, but an updated modelling has been undertaken and shows that the cumulative impact of the movements from this site plus the other allocated sites can still be accommodated by that mitigation scheme. It's also highlighted that when the application originally came in, there was a phase 3 which proposed a multi-storey car park, and that's been removed from the proposal, and that was the element that had the greatest impact in terms of highways impacts. The applicant has agreed to contribute a proportionate financial contribution towards the mitigation works to junction 35 of the M1, and that's been based upon the amount of vehicle movements that this site will generate. So this site will generate approximately 28% of the movements associated with the local plan allocations, and therefore it will contribute 28% of the cost of the mitigation works, which in total are calculated at 2.125 million. So this proposal will secure £416,000 for phase 1 of the development and up to £178,000 for phase 2 of the development, although that phase 2 money will be subject to an updated transport assessment to better understand the impacts of the phase 1 development. So phase 1 can be accommodated without the mitigation works being in place, although it's still required to take a financial contribution because of the wider implications and cumulative impact. But phase 2 will require the mitigation to be in place before the mitigation works. Phase 2 will require mitigation before it can be brought into use. And so there is a condition preventing phase 2 being brought into use until the mitigation works are completed. The impact on the local highway network is considered to be acceptable, and the cycle trail to the west of the site is to be upgraded to a 3-metre wide hard surface route to provide connectivity between the Blackburn Valley Trail and the Trans-Pennine Trail. An air quality assessment has been submitted with the application that finds that there's negligible impacts during the operational phase, and although there are some temporary impacts during the construction phase, these can be controlled through a construction environmental management plan, and there's a condition recommended in the supplementary report for that. Just turning to the supplementary report, there's a number of additional conditions proposed in there. So the first one is that condition which restricts phase 2 being brought into use until the relevant highway mitigation works at junction 35 have been completed, unless there's an updated transport assessment which indicates that that isn't actually necessary. The second condition relates to the construction environmental management plan for wildlife in the area, so that the aim of that is to ensure appropriate working practices for the protection of wildlife and the adjacent local wildlife sites. And then the third condition on there is requiring details of measures to ensure that there's an online booking system and online information on real-time charging availability. There's also an additional representation from Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust, which is summarised in the supplementary report, but to just briefly go through that additional representation, the response raises concerns about the proximity to the local wildlife site and the ancient woodland. It raises concerns that the green refuelling options will still emit nitrogen oxides, carbon dioxide and particulate matter that will be harmful to local flora. It expresses concerns that the light and noise will be harmful to bats and breeding birds in the surrounding area, and that there's potential for contamination of groundwater and the Blackburn Brook. It also suggests that air pollution should have been considered in relation to Natural England's standing advice, and that the submitted air quality assessment is not in line with this guidance. It concludes with suggesting that the application should be refused owing to the impact on irreplaceable natural habitats. And there's an officer response to that as well, which, just to summarise, is essentially stating that the nearest ancient woodland is approximately 50 metres away from the site. It sets up an embankment approximately 20 metres higher than the site and separated by highway and industrial developments. It's not considered that there's any direct impacts, as the proposal is outside of the 15-metre buffer zone, which Natural England suggest in their standing advice. In terms of air quality, the Natural England advice referred to in the representation is specific to certain designations such as SSSIs and European sites, and the site does not fall with any of these. The air quality assessment that has been undertaken does have a different methodology to that set out in the Natural England guidance, but it does show that there will be a minimal impact during the operational phase, and that, subject to appropriate mitigation measures, the construction phase impact will not have an unacceptable impact on the surrounding area. Other matters raised, including noise and light pollution, have been covered in the officer report. And then just finally, in that supplementary, there's a summary of the applicant's consultation process. So the applicant has undertaken their own community engagement exercise and submitted those for consideration, and that's resulted in 60 comments, 58 in support and 2 neutral, and they're just summarised there. Other representations are summarised in the officer report that members will already have viewed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah. We have 2 speakers on this application, 1 for and 1 against. I'm going to take Susan Davison first. She's speaking against this application. You will have up to 5 minutes to speak if you'd like to come forward to the desk in front of you and press the button on your right, if you can see it. Yeah. You can go ahead from now.
Okay, thank you. So I'm here today from the Sheffield and Northern Wildlife Trust because we are opposing this development. Although we fully support the transition away from fossil fuels, this is a case of the right infrastructure in the wrong place. This site is around 50 metres from Smithywood, an irreplaceable habitat. Ancient woodland is defined not by age of trees, but by the continuity of the soil. Undisturbed for at least 400 years, it cannot be recreated within any meaningful timescales. The ecosystem is a massive carbon store, holding up to 20 times more carbon than young woodland. That matters when we are in a climate crisis. If we cannot protect our most resilient habitats, then our ability to adapt to climate change is seriously weakened. It is fundamentally inconsistent to promote cleaner infrastructure to tackle climate change while sacrificing a natural climate regulator. That is why national policy is clear. Development resulting in deterioration of ancient woodland should be refused unless there are wholly exceptional reasons. It is also why Natural England has published the guidance on developing near ancient woodland. Noise, light and air pollution must be taken into account, and sensitive areas within 200 metres should be assessed for pollution. That is why, the emerging Sheffield plan gives them greatest weight. But in practice here, no weight has been given. The officer report doesn't consider the impacts of pollution on the woodland itself, nor does it demonstrate that wholly exceptional reasons have been met. That's an extremely high bar, normally for things like nationally significant infrastructure, and only when there are no suitable alternatives. Here there has been no proper assessment of alternatives. Multiple brownfield and industrial sites exist that could accommodate this development. Crucially, there has been no assessment of whether the impact could lead to deterioration of the woodland. Members should also be clear that the energy hub may be cleaner, but it doesn't mean clean. The fuels proposed can reduce carbon emissions by 60 to 90%, but the nitrogen oxides are not significantly reduced. This facility is expected to serve thousands of HGVs per week. Even with those lower emissions, the volume of traffic is likely to be significant. Nitrogen deposition is one of the biggest threats to ancient woodland. It alters the soil chemistry, damages the fungi, and allows aggressive species to outcompete the specialised plants that define the habitat. That change happens gradually, but it's permanent. From a distance, the woodland may look green, but its ecological function is damaged. Even electric vehicles release fine particles and heavy metals, which settle on the soils and vegetation and cause irreversible damage. There's also nothing to prevent diesel HGV drivers from using the facilities. It would be unsafe to assume that only lower emission vehicles will use them. None of these impacts have been properly assessed. The air quality assessment has not looked at ecological receptors. In addition, this site is within the strategic green network. The report confirms that connections will be lost. This directly conflicts with core strategic policy. Connections should be maintained or enhanced, and this is a clear weakening of the network. The report also acknowledges negative impacts on the bats and the birds. The bat boxes and on buildings on the site will not be an effective mitigation. and the lighting and protection, the low lighting for protection and the high lighting required for security are in conflict. Skylarks are red listed because we have spent decades assuming they will simply move on. That assumption is exactly what this report relies on, and it is exactly what has driven their decline. No meaningful mitigation is offered. This approach is not consistent with the national policy, which requires the protection and recovery of priority species, not their displacement, especially when further development is planned. Policy GS5 requires protected species to be given the greatest weight, yet again here they've been given no weight. So the question before you is not whether it's a good type of development, but whether it's an appropriate location. So I urge that you either refuse this application or at the very least pause the decision until the proper tests have been applied. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and you did it to time. Well done. Can I call Luke Thorpe to the table? And you will also have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, members. My name is Luke Thorpe, Planning Manager at Aegis Energy, the applicant on this proposal. At Aegis, our mission is to accelerate the decarbonisation of commercial transport by developing clean multi-energy hubs across the UK. We are based in Wakefield and employ people from Sheffield, Yorkshire and beyond across engineering, development and other specialist disciplines. And we are focused on delivering practical, low-impact infrastructure that supports the transition to cleaner transport. Sheffield is well known for its logistical, engineering and innovation industries, and we have already received interest in the use of our hub from several local and regionally based businesses. We recognise that concerns have been raised locally, and we have sought to address these throughout the proposals, and more recent engagement has shown a notable level of support. It is important to recognise that following the closure and remediation of the former coal workings, the application site and business park have formed part of a long-standing economic allocation. And this proposition is very real. This is funded in part by local pension schemes, and we are making plans to open the first phase within the next year. And what is a clean multi-energy hub? Well, as described, this hub is designed to serve light and heavy goods vehicles with a mix of low and zero emission recharging and refuelling facilities. And they do show that there is a notable reduction in other harmful pollutants associated with fossil fuels. The design has been shaped through our engagement and relationships with local businesses, including DPD and XPO, and it reflects what fleets and drivers need, which is a reliable, secure and well-managed environment in an optimal location. And that matters because the transition will not be one size fits all. Multi-energy infrastructure like this will give fleets flexibility in how they decarbonise in a way that works for them. And central to the proposals is a high-quality driver welfare building, offering purpose-built spaces for drivers to eat, wash, rest and recuperate in an environment designed by award-winning architects with an expected EPC-A rating. This is an important part of the scheme because this is not only about vehicles, but also about supporting the people who keep supply chains and essential services moving. With an initial grid connection ready and the site to be powered by renewable sources, it is expected to come forward in phases to meet demand, and use is anticipated to increase over time, with bookings and access to be managed for efficient operations and quality of service. And why is this important? Commercial transport is one of the largest carbon-emitting sectors and one of the hardest to decarbonise. If we do not address this now through solutions like this, we are further delaying society's ability to manage the effects of climate change and strengthen our energy security. Facilities like this can remove barriers to achieving this while enabling the uptake of quieter and less polluting vehicles, ensuring cleaner operations for fleets and improved human health. There is also a clear need for better driver welfare and rest facilities, important for driver well-being and for the safe and effective functioning of the road network. Alongside this, the associated investment during construction and operation will support local spending, employment and training opportunities in a growing part of the economy. And this aligns with Sheffield City Council's strategies to decarbonise, generate economic growth and improve community and environmental well-being. So we do agree with officers that this is an appropriate use for the location, and we support their assessment and recommendation, which is based on robust evidence to confirm there are no unacceptable effects. On highways, our assessment uses robust worst-case modelling, with funding secured to support the delivery of motorway junction improvements. The permission would complete cycle path connections through the business park, and inclusive access parking and facilities will be provided for people with disabilities. And to support local ecology, the proposals include multifunctional landscaping and drainage, maintaining ecological corridors around the site. We will be delivering ecological mitigation and enhancements on site, and we have secured an investment in a local habitat bank to achieve the complete B&G requirement. So to conclude, like many people, we at Aegis care deeply about the well-being of our communities and environments. I firmly believe that this is achieved here, with our proposals representing sustainable development and capable of delivering meaningful socio-economic and environmental benefits. Aegis is committed to delivering and operating the development to a high standard and to being a responsible long-term presence in the area.
You have half a minute left.
So that we move to invest in, deliver and unlock these benefits, we hope and trust that members will support the scheme and officers' recommendation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. Sarah and other officers, do you want to respond to the comments made by the speakers?
Thank you, Chair. Just a few brief comments on that. So, in relation to the Natural England guidance, that relates to specific sites such as SSSIs and other protected sites. It's not specifically covering ancient woodland as this site, as the nearby site is. Emerging plan policies only have limited weight. In terms of the air quality assessment that has been done, it didn't specifically assess the impacts on the ancient woodland. However, it did indicate that the air quality impacts of the development would be negligible, particularly during the operational phase. Also, it's worth noting that the number of vehicle movements associated with this use, in comparison to kind of the amount of vehicle use of the M1 motorway, which is the other side of that ancient woodland, will be relatively low. Our ecologists have not raised concern about the impacts on the ancient woodland. In terms of the green network, I think I mentioned previously that will still be retained around the edges of the site and on other landscape in the area. And in terms of skylarks, there is a condition which requires details of mitigation for wildlife to be submitted, and that would include details of that mitigation for the skylarks. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll open it up to members' questions. Henry, your hand has gone up.
I might have another one I'll circle back to, but I'll start with just one to keep it short. So there's several objections mentioned great crested newts, but then there's been an assessment carried out that doesn't find the presence of great crested newts. Was that assessment carried out by the applicant or on behalf of the applicant, or was it carried out sort of independently or by the local authority?
It was carried out by an ecologist on behalf of the applicant.
As part of the Conservation and Environmental Management Plan, will further surveys be carried out to double check that, seeing as we have sort of conflicting information here?
I just refer you to the wording of that. It's in the supplementary and it's the second condition in there. So that requires details, fourth line, the plan shall include details concerning pre-commencement checks for wildlife. So that would be covered by that.
My understanding of the legislation around new mitigation specifically is that the applicant would have to provide a suitable habitat for them and then fence the site off, collect the newts and move them. In case they are found to be on site, has an area been set aside for a newt pond and a hibernaculum and things like that?
No, I don't believe there has been within the red line boundary of the site.
Barbara, your hand went up.
Thank you, Chair. Reading through the application, there's quite a few areas of concern, if you like, so I'll come to them as I remember them. I mean, when it comes to lighting, it's a very prominent position, and there's lots of sort of to be agreed throughout the whole document, to be agreed, permissions to be sought and all the rest of it. Very prominent, then I'm thinking that sort of what about the effect on the wider landscape? Because whatever shielding you use, it can be very, very prominent, and without any sort of indication of exactly what's on offer, it's quite hard to judge what's appropriate with lighting. Another thing is the drainage. I mean, it says that it's not a flooding risk there. It's a most unlikely to be one, but it says that sort of the surface drainage will be to a lagoon in Lagoon 3, and planning permissions got to be sought to actually utilise it. There's also going to be runoff because there's a lot of hard standing, and that's assumed it will eventually feed into the brook. Now, we know full well that sort of further downstream there's a lot of flooding associated with that, and yet there's no mention of that to ensure that sort of in periods of extreme rainfall, which we do have, you can't deny that, then the runoff can be extreme. And as it is, sort of when you've got heavy vehicles moving with all the particulates as well as sort of, you know, the land itself, how can you possibly sort of assure people that the brook will not flood and cause problems downstream, and B, that the pollutants that will arise in that area will be contained safely? I think they're the two main ones at the moment, but there are quite a few others which I think, like Henry, I'll come back to. Thank you.
Right, so the first one was lighting. So essentially, yes, the site will need to be lit, obviously, for sort of safety and security. And we've put a condition on requiring the details of that. Essentially, the site is prominent, but it is also seen within the context of an existing urban area. So those buildings that it's adjacent to and that highway, they're lit already. So provided that it's not floodlit, which I don't believe is the anticipation, then it's considered that the lighting could be appropriate for that area. So, you know, low levels of lighting, perhaps low in terms of lux levels, but also in terms of heights of bollards, baffles and cowls to ensure that the lighting is directed to the correct place. So I think subject to appropriate controls, that could be acceptable, and just in the context of that area is not likely to be inappropriate.
One thing about lighting, sort of, I mean, I did note in the specifications you said maybe sort of using different, rather than the harsh sort of lighting, sort of use subdued colours. And I do know that in certain areas they use red lighting because it's sort of more sympathetic to wildlife. But without any details about what's there, I'm thinking it's just unfair for us to make that judgment call. But that's my comment about it.
I think we think it's appropriate to condition that because we do believe that an appropriate solution could be reached, and that's why it's recommended as a condition. Obviously, there's the impact on wildlife and the impact on kind of the prominence of the site as well in the local landscape that need to be considered for the lighting. I'll move on to drainage now. So essentially the plan for the drainage is that everything will sort of run off to I think there's a site plan that shows kind of where the swales are on the site. So let me just skip to the right drawing. This either isn't working or is being very slow, so just bear with me. Are you doing that? I think that one is good. Yeah, thank you. So essentially the plan for the drainage infrastructure is that everything will be captured within the hard surfing, like the parking bays. Water will be able to run through the parking bays, and then it will all run to the swales around the site. So it's not particularly clear on this screen, but there's blue colour around some of the edges. So along that northern edge, there's like a blue strip, which is kind of a swale. And on the western side, there's a blue strip as well, and also on the eastern side. So it's proposed that the surface water will be directed into these kind of storage areas, and then it will, and there'll be within those storage areas as well, there'll be kind of measures to control whatever contaminants are coming off of the water, so like oil interceptors and that kind of thing. And then the water will discharge by underground pipe to Lagoon 3, which is just to the west of the site, and was put in to deal with surface water drainage when the business park was first constructed. And then the surface water coming out of the lagoon will be at a controlled rate, and there is a condition which controls the rate at which that water will be released into the Blackburn Brook. Obviously, so the plan is for attenuation largely on site and in the lagoon, contamination to be dealt with through measures within the site, and details of that can be provided through condition. I think that's condition 3 or 4, which requires quality of the surface water to be considered. And then in terms of flooding, if the water is released into the brook at a controlled rate, then that will prevent flooding.
Except that I can't find any sort of reference to how much water will be used in the truck washing. And that can use quite a lot of water. So if you've got truck washing and sort of a downpour event, I mean, and the lagoon was constructed some time ago, how can you be sure the capacity is great enough for all these events?
Well, in terms of the truck wash, I believe that drains to the foul water system anyway, so that wouldn't impact on surface water drainage. And there's the condition, if I could refer you to it, I think there's 2 conditions relating to drainage, and that will require full calculations and details to be submitted, and evidence to show that the infrastructure is appropriate and can handle the amount of water.
I think the concern is basically there's lots of things that sort of will only come into play if we grant permission, and then you'll do the conditions, and then we'll get the figures, which is the wrong way round for me. But
I think that's not an unusual approach for us to take on planning applications, that the drainage infrastructure is detailed and submitted through condition.
Andrew, you have questions?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just going back to the elevation and the height, in the presentation, the officer talked about 2 alternatives in terms of methane storage. Just go back to the methane tower, the 16-metre tower. So where can that be seen from? Because I'm very aware that when you're on a plateau, doesn't mean everything can be seen from people from the west. And the site visit was very, very helpful to understand the site, but I still couldn't quite get my head around just how high that tower is and who will be able to see it and who won't be able to see it. That's it.
Thank you. So that is located, and not sure whether you'll be able to make it out, but there's a red circle on the site plan. So if you look at the right-hand side of the screen, the top image that's coloured in, there's a red circle which is showing you where that is positioned, and it's on the sort of southeastern corner of the site. Obviously, that is, as I mentioned, that will be the tallest infrastructure on the site, and you would get views of that from the surrounding area, but it's a fairly small footprint of development. So again, in the context of those larger buildings that you've got in the surrounding area, it's considered that would likely be acceptable.
Thank you, Chair. And just to go back to biodiversity and net gain and officers' comments on page 45, I'm particularly thinking, my colleagues were talking about newts, but just the issue of that skylarks. I mean, skylarks are red listed. One assumes they're red listed because, for whatever reason, they live in scrubland and they are able to reclaim sites like this. And then when these sites are redeveloped, we're putting more pressure on a red listed species. So what mitigations are going to be included for the Skylark, and explain to me the eventual net gain and where that would be. And I understand it's be off-site, but whereabouts and how close to this site?
So in terms of the Skylark, the survey that was undertaken found one territory in use on the site. And our ecologists were satisfied that given the character of the surrounding area, there were other sort of potential sites where that Skylark could nest instead of this site. Obviously, there would be restrictions on when development could occur in terms of kind of outside of the nesting season to ensure that that would be one of the levels of mitigation. But then in terms of any other mitigation, the condition recommended in the supplementary requires details of mitigation. It doesn't specifically mention the Skylark, but if members thought that was required, we could add that into that condition.
Thank you, Andy. Mark?
Yep, thank you. Just for my clarity here, the cycleway footpath, I couldn't quite on the map work out where the cycleway goes. And I was just wondering if it was going to be completely untouched, in any way interrupted by the works, because obviously we're trying to encourage active travel, and if the cyclists have to dismount to cross anywhere that's interrupting it, things like that, it will interfere with it a little.
Keep forgetting my microphone. So the route goes to the north and the west of the site. It's kind of a whitish line that you can just make out around the edge of the site. I can point to it if it helps.
Is it going through the building?
No, it's in between kind of, Gary's going to point to it.
Yes, it is going between those two buildings and then round there.
And round, yeah.
Yeah, that's very, very helpful.
So it's outside, thank you, Gary. It's outside of the red line boundary, but there has been a previous planning application which secures improvements to that at the moment, because at the moment it's kind of a rough surfaced trail. And the planning application shows it as a 3 metre wide hard surface trail linking to the southern end, which ultimately links to the Transpennine Trail further down, I believe. So there will be improvements, and I'm just trying to find the condition, which is condition number 7, which says that no phase of the development shall be brought into use until the improvements to that cycle trail are brought into use.
Does it remain a public right of way? Is it subject to being closed when it goes between those buildings at night, that sort of thing?
My understanding that it's a public right of way and will remain open as such.
Right.
Douglas?
Thank you, yeah. I've got 2 sets of questions on the flood risk management and on the nature recovery. But actually just picking up on a couple of points about the floodlighting that Councillor Master made, and then the cycle route. I think my understanding is that the cycle route will be maintained to a far better standard when the job is done. Just a question about, will the cycle route remain open whilst work is ongoing? And is that conditioned in something like the CEMP? That's the first thing.
Don't have that information available to me, unfortunately. And I wouldn't like to guess at the answer to that.
In that case, as there's a new condition, so the new condition that's proposed in the supplementary, I think is really helpful. That involves a CMP for the, can we include ensuring that through access on the cycle route is maintained one way or another at all times? For the obvious reason that if it's suddenly closed off to people who use it regularly without warning, that's going to be quite detrimental. Can we find form words to fit that in?
I'll ask Vicky to jump in here, but it is outside the red line boundary, so I'm not convinced that that would be appropriate.
So, sorry, yeah, I was talking about the contents of the CEMP. I just want to make sure that it's addressed as you would expect it would be. I mean, you wouldn't expect a road just to be closed off, so I'm just going to make sure it's the same treatment for a cycleway. Vicky?
Yes,
Thank you.
Vicky's going to respond.
Thank you, Chair. The cycle route is a public right-of-way, so it shouldn't be closed or obstructed. Obviously, there may be some maintenance issues, but it is outside the applicant's control, so it wouldn't be something that would be reasonable to put in a condition to ask the applicant to control something that they couldn't possibly control. Thank you, Chair.
Right, okay, I thought that was fine. It slightly conflicts with what Sarah's just said about the fact that, because except that the cycle route itself is outside the red line boundary, but there's still a condition that's applicable to it.
Douglas?
Yeah.
I just wonder, wouldn't that have to come to planning committee if the cycle path had to be closed for a period?
Thank you, Chair. I don't believe that's the case, but in respect of this, where there is something that is outside a red line boundary, but it's still something that's thought to be relevant to the planning permission, the only way you can deal with that is what's called a Grampian condition, whereby you prevent something happening on site until something outside the red line boundary has happened. So I believe what the planning office here has proposed is that a Grampian condition goes in that says that this development can't be brought into use until that cycle route has been provided to the new standard that's currently already got planning permission for that purpose. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, sorry, so my question was about, that's actually a really good condition. I thought I'm really happy to support that. But I just want to make sure that it won't just be closed off in the process of work, which could be for months. I think you're saying, though, there's a public right of way, so it can't just be closed. Is that correct?
Thank you, Chair. My understanding is that as a public right-of-way, if it were to be closed to provide maintenance or upgrades, then there would be an alternative route provided during that period of time. Thank you, Chair.
That's excellent. Right, that's one worry cleared out of the way. The other question was about floodlighting, which I hadn't thought of before, but Sarah, I think you said that you're not anticipating there will be loads of floodlighting there, but can you just talk through how the conditions work to ensure that? Because obviously the whole question of lighting overall is pretty important for lots of reasons, not least the ecology and also the visual intrusion of people living quite a distance off. As you said, it's right on top of the hill in a way. Can you just take us through the conditions on how that will be controlled?
Yep, so it's condition 21, which requires details of an external lighting scheme. And there's a number of criteria within there. So it says that the scheme shall demonstrate that external lighting would have an appropriate impact on the visual amenities of the area from dusk to dawn, given the open air use and the site's hilltop siting, not cause disturbance to wildlife, not cause disamenity to any neighbouring occupiers, and be sufficient for the operational needs of the development and the safety of users. So those 4 criteria would need to be met as part of the condition. There's also a condition, it's also mentioned as well in relation to condition 24, which is mitigation for the bats which commute and forage on the site, and that requires a lighting plan as well to be acceptable in relation to bats and to meet the guidance contained within the Bat Conservation Trust and Institute of Lighting Professionals guidance note.
Right, thanks, that's actually really helpful. And actually the bit you didn't mention on condition 21 is about the limit on increasing the lighting later on. I think it says there must be no intensification of lighting. So that's actually quite an important safeguard, so that's quite helpful. Right, thanks. Can I go back on the questions I was originally going to ask? So back onto flood risk management. I do have a role on the Yorkshire Flood and Coastal Committee, so I'm just aware that the Blackburn Brook is one of those hotspots of flooding, where there's been a number of demands for flood mitigation on that haven't come to anything yet. So it is an area where there is serious concern. I think the flood conditions are a bit in different places here. So again, I'm going to ask you, can you just talk me through how the conditions would work? So I understand it's not in a flood zone. The site itself isn't going to flood, but there's got to be a huge amount of runoff just because we're talking about a porous area at the moment that's going to be largely surfaced over. And you talked about the swales there, but just the volume of runoff and the condition of 60 litres per second, which sounds like quite a lot of flow. How does that compare with the present?
I don't have the information as to how it would compare with the present, but that condition, so there's a number of conditions about drainage, so I think it's, just check, I think it's condition 3. Yeah, which requires details of calculations and model results relating to surface water drainage. And condition 28, which requires details of how the drainage infrastructure will be managed, and condition 29, which restricts the discharge rate from that lagoon. All those conditions have been, and the proposals have been assessed by our drainage officers, and they've considered those to be acceptable. I think if the flow rate of the release from the lagoon is controlled, then that will ensure that the water is released in a controlled manner and prevent flooding downstream.
Right, so I'm just conscious that drainage is different from flood risk management. So you said just condition 29, didn't you? So that's the one that has the flow rate of 60 litres per second. Okay, so are you saying that's been assessed? Has it been assessed not just by our drainage teams, but also by our flood risk teams?
Being assessed by our lead local flood authority.
Right, okay, that's the flood risk team, so yeah, we can assume they know what they're talking about. That's helpful. And then last questions was about the nature recovery angle. And obviously there's quite a few issues there about red list species, namely the skylark. I don't think we can ignore that. And I think we've heard from the experts in this field that you can't just assume that skylarks will move and sort themselves out. I was just puzzled by it. I'm just going to find this page because I didn't quite understand this. I'm actually looking at page 44 in the report there. So essentially it says that the planning application has been supported by the submission of an environmental impact assessment, which I think is actually an ecological impact assessment, and a statutory BNG report, which will be revised during the consideration of this application. And it says these documents have been assessed by the Ecology Unit, considering the objection from the Sheffield Ross and Wildlife Trust. But it doesn't say what their assessment is. How do we know what our own ecologists have assessed this? Because clearly it's a problem, isn't it? It's a problem area.
The ecologist's assessment is intertwined within the report, so it's not explicitly replicated word for word, but essentially the officer report reflects the advice from our ecologists.
Are there any bits in here you can draw my attention to that says that it's okay? Because I was hoping to see something a bit more explicit rather than intertwined in there.
I think those comments obviously assess the proposal, and they talk about what ecological species are on the site and the impact of the development on them, and sort of conclude that on balance it is acceptable. That's their recommendation.
Well, all right, okay. So given that it's identified that there are skylarks there, that they're red list species, is there anything in the report that tells us what will happen to those birds and their habitat? Because I couldn't see anything, so that's obviously of concern, and I guess that would need to be drawn into condition some way, which I'll perhaps want to ask about in a moment.
So no, there isn't anything specifically about what mitigation measures will be undertaken for the skylark. I think our ecology officer accepted that there was just one territory recorded and that there was other grassland habitat in the wider area, and then the condition in the supplementary, which was the second condition in there, was intended to kind of understand what working practices would be undertaken in relation to ensuring that any disruption was minimised and that mitigation would be undertaken as well. I think I mentioned as well earlier, if members thought it was appropriate, we could include specific reference to mitigation for skylarks in that condition.
So I think that would be helpful. I don't know if you can advise on some wording about that, because I mean, I just think that if it's a red list species, we can't pretend it's not there when the report says it is there, and I think we need to have something to address that. I'm just slightly concerned because this is obviously the area where your report quite rightly picks out this. The applicant's been disappointing in this sense. It's clearly a bit substandard. And I think what's of particular concern to me is that over the course of as the planning app has gone through iterations, the impact on biodiversity has got worse from when it was originally submitted, and that's not what you normally expect. And I want to know how we're going to have some control over that if this is granted, because I mean this is quite a serious site in that respect. Do you want to just talk me through how the condition might work?
So yeah, obviously the officer report does detail kind of ecology and that there will be some impacts and draws a balanced conclusion on that. I'm happy to discuss that further as required. In relation to that condition, which is the second condition in the supplementary, I think perhaps something as simple as including, so fifth line down where it says an ecological constraints and mitigation plan, at the end of there you could include something like including mitigation proposals for the skylark. I think that would potentially address that.
Can I just follow up
Yeah.
on Doug's point there? Migrating birds have a nesting season. I presume there is one for the skylark. So would it be possible to condition that work doesn't take place during that bird's nesting season?
There would be a nesting season. So we could include reference to ensuring that work doesn't occur within that nesting season. I think that would be appropriate.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that would probably be sensible. And I think your suggestion, Sarah, of having specific reference to skylark, and with the Chair's suggestion of ensuring that we avoid nesting season, whenever that is. I don't know about skylarks enough.
Formulated a proposal there, Douglas.
I was hoping Sarah was doing it. I think Sarah's got, I was asking Sarah's advice on what the wording might be, and I think she's got something. So if
it's something we'd have to vote on, is what I'm getting at.
I think I understand what you're asking for, and I think, yes, we could include specific reference to skylark within that condition and include details for works outside of the nesting season. But I think you need to propose that. And
I'd be very happy to propose the thing what you just said. But I mean, this is actually where I do rely on your advice as a professional to fit the right wording in there. But if I could propose something like that at the appropriate point, that would be helpful.
And Andrew's hand has immediately shot up to second your proposal, with final wording to be determined by.
Chair, can I also just suggest that, as well as agreeing the wording of the condition with the co-chairs, that we also discuss it with our ecologists, because I think obviously skylarks probably do have specific requirements, and I mean, apparently they are actually a mobile species and are used to relocating in relation to when crops are rotated anyway. So it may be that the ecologists' concerns have been alleviated, obviously in the knowledge that they are used to relocating, but we can speak to them specifically and ask if there's what mitigation would be suitable for them.
Yeah, thanks. I think this sounds like a conversation of non-ecologists just recognising that birds fly about. So, yeah. I mean, the other question, well, the other way of looking at it is, say, I mean, do we actually need a bit more input from the ecologists on this? Because the other thing will just be to defer this part of the application, or defer the application for that sort of input to get that. So actually following up on Councillor Nostra's question about has the assessment of the species been done just by the applicant who's got a vested interest, or has it been done independently by our own ecologists, and hence also my question about is it referenced in the report. So I mean, given what you said, Dana, would it be actually easier just to get the ecologist report on that separately and either bring this back or...
I think Sarah's already explained that the original assessment submitted with the application is done by independent ecologists on behalf of the applicant, and also our ecologists have assessed that submission and didn't raise any significant concerns. So I think if we were to liaise with them in terms of the specific wording of the condition, it would just be to make sure that we're getting it right and asking for the right type of mitigation.
Chair, I think you've got a proposal and a seconder here to amend the condition to refer to mitigation for skylark and also to avoid the nesting season. So I think you need to go ahead and vote on that. I do know, however, the planning officer has said that they would also like to discuss the mitigation regarding skylarks with the ecology team as well. So I think if you want to vote on that basis, that the wording will be decided between officers and the co-chairs following consultation with them. I think that would be appropriate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vicky. Can I see a show of hands in favour, support of that recommendation? Or condition, additional condition? Yes, that looks unanimous to me. Yeah.
It's an
amended condition. Yeah. I think Henry you had your hand up, didn't you, to ask a question?
You'll be pleased to know that Councillor Douglas Thompson has asked several of the things that I cropped up, which leaves me with two, which really one and a half. The half follows on from Councillor Whittaker and Councillor Johnson's comments about the cycle path. In condition 7, the gramping condition, it says no phase shall be brought into use until upgrades. And upgrade seems a little bit vague, but it does also refer to a previous planning application. Does the previous planning application define the level of upgrade to a particular standard?
Yeah, that application that's referenced sets out the detail of the upgrade, and it's a 3 metre wide hard surface trail.
So there's no chance of a tokenistic bag of sand fulfilling that condition, which is my concern. And my other question was about the staging of the highways assessment, where there's going to be another assessment carried out once phase 1's brought into operation, to see if our predictions around phase 2 are accurate, which sounds highly sensible. But if that second assessment finds out that we've really lowballed it during our initial assessment and the mitigations are going to be much greater than we'd thought, how much contingency, if any, have we required from the developer to accommodate that?
So that is set out in the heads of terms. Essentially, refer to the right page where the heads of terms are. So in various stages, but it's on page 49. So the first phase, there is no requirement to kind of monitor or review the transport assessment. The transport assessment is based upon worst case scenarios, because we don't really know how something like this will operate. And so it's been based on those worst case scenarios, assuming that usage will peak during peak hours, which is probably not likely actually to be the case because of the nature of the use. So in terms of phase 2, there's going to be a reappraisal of to how phase 1 works. If that reappraisal shows that it's actually used less, or the impact is less because actually the peak movements are not during the peak hours on the motorway, then there's an opportunity to reduce the payments. There isn't an equal opportunity to uplift the payments, and we've designed it like that, I believe, because it's based upon a worst case scenario anyway, so it's unlikely that it would be worse than the worst case scenario, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. My only thought on that is that given how far we are behind some of our European colleagues in terms of decarbonising freight. I'm not sure the phrase worst case scenario is super appropriate. I might think of it as best case scenario if the site's actually really popular and it's fully in use.
So that was more of a comment, wasn't it? Yeah. Barbara, you have a question?
Right, so I was just wondering whether Richard hasn't spoken yet. You might want to come in first.
There you go, Richard. Your colleague has deferred to you.
I'm immediately suspicious, Barbara. No, anyway, thank you, Chair. Yeah, a couple of things, and really, Henry's kind of nudged me. In terms of the phase 1, phase 2 timings, etc., in your initial presentation's introduction, you talked about phase 2 could not commence until the mitigation work had been done. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, so there's two elements. So there's the heads of terms, which secures when the financial contribution comes forward. But there's also a condition, which is set out in the supplementary report. I think it's the first condition in there, which essentially restricts phase 2 being brought into use until those junction mitigation works have been completed. And the reason for that is because the transport modelling that's been done to date essentially shows that the phase 1 the phase 1 movements can be accommodated on the highway without needing those mitigation works being in place. But as I just mentioned, those forecasts are based upon the site being really heavily used, really at capacity. In reality, that might not be the case. So that condition restricts phase 2 being brought into use until the mitigation works are brought into place, unless a transport assessment is submitted, which actually shows that what's being forecast is inaccurate and the impact is less, and therefore the mitigation works aren't required at that stage. And then those works might be able to go ahead before the mitigation is brought into place. Does that make sense? Yeah.
And if I could come back then, but one of the criteria of the transport assessment is it must be based on phase 1 and 2 operating at full capacity.
Yeah.
So I don't quite understand where there can be that sort of wriggle room if we're saying that the assessment must be done at full capacity. So we will know what the full capacity is. I'm sure the applicant probably knows that now. And that doesn't take any that takes forecasting out of it, because it's kind of saying it's a definite volume.
I think it allows for, so the current modelling that's been done anticipates that the peak usage of the site will be at the peak hours, and that's really when the mitigation scheme needs to come into play, because that's when there's the most vehicle movements on the strategic network. But in reality, it may be that actually the peak usage is at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the motorway is quieter, and therefore the impact is less, if that makes sense. And it may be that people, the turnover is lower than anticipated. So at the moment there's a time associated with the turnover, dwell time, recharging time, and if that in reality is lower, then again the impact and the amount of vehicle movements might be lower. So it just allows us to actually understand how it's operating and functioning, and then apply that to phase 2.
Thank you. If I may continue, Chair. Who will actually do that transport assessment?
The transport assessment will be done by a consultant on behalf of the applicant, and then it will be assessed by us, and we would agree with National Highways as well.
There is a degree of robustness in it, in the process, okay. And then just coming on to the actual proposal is quite specific in usage. Under the terms of that proposal, this facility could not just be used as an overnight parking facility. Is that correct?
It's so the description is a recharging and refuelling facility. We have considered whether it could be used as an overnight parking facility, and we have put a condition on requiring details of how. So phase 1 has got a lot of hard surfacing associated with it. Let me show you. So phase one has got a lot, it basically provides all the hard surfacing, but not all the marking out of the bays. So that area to the right-hand side of the screen, where it's just grey, is essentially just hard surfacing. So we've proposed to put a condition on there that requires details of a management plan to prevent that being used essentially before it's marked out for bays.
And finally, Chair, as I understand it, we've discussed this a bit on the site visit. Any change, I mean, this is quite an innovative concept, I believe, and with any innovation, there is always a degree of potential failure. I hope, should this go ahead, I hope it is a success. My understanding is that if it doesn't work for whatever reason, change of use would require further applications, planning application. Is that correct?
A change of use to another use would require a planning application.
Great, okay. Thank you very much.
And I presume any substantial changes, if they wanted to remodel phase 2, would also incur a planning application.
Potentially, or a section 73, depending on what the extent of those changes were.
Yeah. So, much like happens elsewhere, really. Barbara, back
Thank
to
you, Chair. Right, actually that leads into what I was trying to raise. I was very concerned in the document. It said that the employment opportunities by this proposal are very, very limited. We know it's a prime development site for all sorts of industrial applications, and it does worry me that we're sort of tying it up in something that may not benefit the city in all sorts of ways, especially, and there's pressure for firms and businesses located within the city or close to the city centre to move out simply because of the residential developments. Now, simply because it's phase 1 and phase 2, and we've had situations before where sort of we've granted permission, no work's happened. The developer comes back and says, I can't do this unless you grant me A, B and C. So I think this is what sort of Richard was referring to. What is available to us to make sure that at least phase 1 goes ahead, and if it does not, then or then phase 2 cannot, we can still put conditions on so we can utilise what remains of the site for another purpose, because it does worry me that we've had so many sites tied up with approval but no subsequent developments. And there are so many sort of ifs, ands and buts and permissions required, and this will be sought and that will be sought. It worries me about the future of this site, considering its location. So that's the first thing. And I think the second thing, I mean, I think, again, it's what you're mentioning about overnight parking, because knowing how long it takes for a vehicle to be recharged, the welfare provisions are pretty basic. And to me, it sounds more like sort of a service station or sort of a motorway service station where you'd have cafe provision and maybe even sort of, sleepovers for the duration. So that would that be looked on favourably in the future? Should that be required if there is a huge demand for this site? Because again, there's so many things that we just don't know about this site. It worries me.
I mean, I think we can only assess what's in front of us. So in terms of any future applications coming forwards and how we look upon those, I don't think we can really comment on that at this stage. In terms of your first question, can you just remind me what it was? Oh, can we make them do it, essentially, wasn't it? I think the straightforward answer to that is I don't really see how we could make sure that they do the development.
Sorry, Chair, there's nothing in the legislation that allows us to compel a developer to implement their planning permission. They have the usual 3 years in which to do so. And it's like any other form of development. I mean, it could be a huge industrial shed that employed 500 people, but equally that may not go ahead. So, we're granting permission for the use of the land. That's what you're considering.
And that's what doesn't reassure me, simply because of past history, and also we've been assured by the developer that funding is available, but with all the conditions and requirements, sort of maybe the funding is not quite as upfront as possible, and you don't know that, and you're saying we can't consider that because we've got to consider the application.
We're considering the land use, and the conditions are proposed in order to make the proposal acceptable. So we can't not have the conditions aren't to do with funding or any other arrangements. They're to do with making the development acceptable.
It's the cost.
Vicky, you wanted to come in at this
Thank you,
point.
Chair. Yeah, just sort of a brief reminder of where we're at in terms of we need to make the decision in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise, and whether the development will go ahead or whether there's funding there, it doesn't form part of that picture. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vicky. Gary, I believe you have a question or two.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Colleagues have asked other stuff what we're going to ask, but it's about the lighting, and you said a few times now, Sarah, that it's what's in front of us we've got to discuss, and the lighting's not in front of us. It's down to officers to come back and do that wherever you're going to do it. And I feel that's a shame, because I think that for us as councillors here to pass this development or not, that's very relevant, because where I live, I look over this site. Yes, from a fair distance away from Grenoside to there, it's a mile or so, maybe more. But it's on the horizon, and when I look at other structures, and we talked about red lights and things like that, that's something where we as councillors should have an input into that, I believe. I know legal's looking at me now, but and that's where I think we're falling short on this. There's a few things, what ifs and buts and maybes, we're going to come back to that, about watercourse and things, what colleagues have said. I think that should have been in the report. I think there's a lot of stuff missing out of this report. So I just wonder if you can, my question is, Chair, I just wonder if you can go back and reassure me about the lands. We talked, we were quick dodgy on site, actually. We were going on that cycle, we nearly got knocked down a couple of times. I think all cyclists, by the way, all cyclists should have bells on, to give us a pre-warning they're behind us, they're going right up to us. It's just, if you can just tell me in more detail about the lighting, what this site's going to have. I know it's going to go to officers later on.
I can't tell you exactly what it's going to have because it's controlled by condition, but we are satisfied that that with appropriate lighting strategy, that it will be acceptable. I think, as I mentioned, the site is prominent, but it is also viewed within the context of an industrial area where there are existing buildings, there's roads that are lit, and provided that the lighting levels and the design heights, etc., of the lighting were similar to sort of what's in the surrounding area, it's considered that a scheme could be designed that would ensure that it was acceptable in the landscape.
But again, we will have to wait and see that in the report somewhere else. It won't be this board, but we'll be discussing it, which is a shame. And just on the cycle path on the east side, again, there's nothing down there to plant hedgerows or some trees and things to just to stop that big, industrial area looking as it does on the horizon.
There is some soft landscaping on the boundaries of the site, but because the site's at a little bit of a plateau and the land slopes down from the site, it is sort of not the most effective screen at present. A landscaping scheme is proposed and will be secured by condition, but the amount of landscaping in terms of, I suppose, things that would screen in terms of trees is limited, particularly along that western boundary, because of the SUDS infrastructure as well, because of the drainage infrastructure that will be around the edges of the site.
See, again, you said that's all going to be discussed later. I think that in here is a relevant thing to discuss at this planning board, but we can't do it because it's not been discussed. And I went on site, I met you on site and a few colleagues as well. And that, unless there's a pipe running down that footpath, I can't understand why we can't have some trees there what's going to be 30, 40 foot high.
I suppose we're assessing the proposals that we have in front of us. They have submitted a draft landscape plan which does include some tree planting, but it's more on the eastern edge of the site and not on this western edge of the site where the drainage infrastructure is proposed. So I wouldn't want to offer that as an option because I don't think in this case it is an option to have sort of high planting along that boundary.
Chair, I'm going to have to say something on that because it's, like I say, it's all right, it's not in, you can't say that that's all right. If that planting plan was in here for us to look at it, you know what I mean, then we could decide. If officers in that planning department about ecological areas said, well, we can't plant no edging down there because we've got a big pipe underneath there. You know what I mean? So, you know what I'm saying? It's hard for us to understand this moment in time. You can't reassure us that that can't be done.
There is a draft landscape plan which was shown at the last slide. Let me just find it. But it doesn't include planting along that boundary, and that's not the intention of the condition to secure details.
And that's a shame. Like I said, from a distance, all you're going to see is that. You're not going to see nothing, soft landscaping, anything. Only very small shrubs. Thank you, Chair.
Douglas, is that a question?
It is a question, yeah. I was going to hang fire with questions because it's about hedges and Gary's point is a good one. What I was really wanted to ask is what actually is the proposal for the hedging around the edge? So the starting point is, as we said before, the ecological aspects are disappointing, as in the report. There's concerns about the BNG and the proposal to deliver most of it off-site. And on a site like this, there is actually huge opportunity for doing quite a lot of ecological work and BNG on-site, in particular when you look at a perimeter hedge, because obviously it's a very big perimeter there. And there is, I'm assuming that on screen now the dark green bits are where there will be some sort of greenery, but I just wonder if you can tell us what is proposed for the perimeter.
On that plan there, the dark green bits are the existing trees which are proposed to be retained around the perimeter of the site.
So the question is about how those could be enhanced, because although there are trees there, there's got to be scope in that for, and what I'm really looking for is not more trees, but to more hedge planting. The purpose of that is to build up wildlife corridors and to ensure the continuity, but also cover for a lot of species requiring that sort of habitat. I mean, obviously hedges contain a lot of stuff there. So I saw, so it's not in the report at all. I did have a look at the documents online, and there's a reference to a relatively small hedge, 1.5 metres in height. And I'm wondering if, and this might come in the detail of the condition, but whether we could actually have that expanded to just have a lot more hedge, basically. If you could find, say a 5 metre strip around the edge, that would be a significantly better habitat and would certainly help meet the BNG. So I suppose I want to ask, how could we make best use of the conditions that are here together? So I think 22, 23 and 24, possibly address those together. Sorry, do you get the point I'm making, and what could you suggest?
I'm not convinced that we could be so specific as to require a 5 metre length of hedgerow, but I do wonder whether there's an opportunity to include a condition which requires perhaps a habitat management plan for the surrounding, like those green areas, obviously not all within the site boundary, but particularly to the south, where there is some to be retained, perhaps we could include a condition that requires the management and maintenance, sort of improvements of those areas.
Again, that would be a very helpful thing because it's about preserving what's there already, but I'm also just conscious that it butts right up to the bit that actually is ancient woodland. And of course, on the other side, you've got the local wildlife sites going onto the Blackburn Brook. So it actually is a really important corridor. If you got there, it looks pretty scrubby now, but scrubby contains a lot of wildlife. So, yeah, I guess I'm at the point of sort of proposing what you just said. It sounded good, so
yeah,
I'd like to
so just as well to kind of reflect on that as well. So it's just worth noting that we can put some sort of condition on to require those areas to be improved. But the ancient woodland isn't directly adjoining that those trees. But also that obviously the statutory biodiversity condition will require a 10% net gain overall, so there will be a net gain provided overall. But if members think it's appropriate to improve what habitat on site is retained, then we could consider a management plan.
Okay, so yeah, I probably would, on your advice, I probably would propose that we have a habitat management plan because that's the sort of thing really important. But also, it would seem to be something that the developer could easily accommodate because it will presumably go towards their BNG contribution. They've got to do something. So it's something they'll have to do in any case. But if it will enhance this area, and as Gary said, basically having much taller hedging than the rather limited one would have a lot of benefits all round, both as amenity, light pollution, visual amenity, etc. So, yeah, so I'd be happy to propose that.
I saw Henry's hand rise to second that proposal. Yeah. Are you happy to take a vote on it? Is that allowed? Yeah. Right. People happy to support that? Yeah. Yeah. Lots of hands going up. Thank you. And that's an additional condition that we'll be voting on when we come to get to that point. Can I move to comments now? Yeah. Okay. Mark, were you wanted to comment?
Yeah, with regards to the woodland, I noticed from the previous picture that showed the footpath and things that there is already a development to the east between this development and the woodland. And of course, that is cut through by the motorway, which is will have had far more impact than this. On the other side, the footpath creates a bit of distancing between this and the woodland on that side, but it would be so much improved with a tree line or a hedgerow or something that creates a real physical barrier. Definitely would be much, much improved. But overall, generally, we must encourage the transition to net zero because ultimately global warming is going to have far more effect on our regional wildlife than this particular building on this woodland. Net zero is an aim that is so important. We must encourage anything that moves towards it. So I will be backing this thing.
Barbara.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I'm just not convinced that sort of the drainage and the subsequent flooding downstream issues have been addressed properly, or the lighting, and there's quite a few other factors that I just don't think we've got the details on that we can make a valid judgment. Yes, I agree that sort of it'll be a useful facility, but I cannot support the application as it stands. There's just too many unknowns with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Andrew?
Yeah, I mean,
Sorry, you were pointing so away from
Sorry.
yourself.
Thank you. Sorry, Chair.
Sorry, Andrew.
I just wanted to remind members about the planning practice guidance regarding rewarding costs at potential appeal. And just to note that one of the risks is refusing planning permission on a planning ground capable of being dealt with by conditions where it's concluded that suitable conditions would enable the proposed development to go ahead. So obviously what members have got here is the planning officer saying that they believe that suitable conditions can deal with some of the areas that have been mentioned. And obviously another risk of appeal stage is the failure to produce evidence to substantiate each reason for refusal on appeal. And as members will know, a risk of cost award at appeal is not a material consideration, but you should be giving consideration to whether you've got evidence to substantiate any potential reason for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
You want to come back on that, Barbara?
Can I just say there was the request to have it deferred until we had more information about these things. Now, I don't know, sort of considering sort of with elections coming up, whether that's a viable option. But I really, just not comfortable with all these conditions, all the hoops that the sort of applicant has to jump through. Legal permission here, sort of collaboration with somebody else, getting the on-site parking with the other organisations on site already approved. There are so many things that we don't know. And as I say, I don't know whether that's viable when some of us may not be here in May to actually reconvene the application. That's what worries me.
So, do I take it from what you've just said, Barbara, that you are putting a proposal on the table to defer this application?
I'd ask Victoria's opinion on this, considering the fact that sort of it can only be heard, a deferred application can only be heard by members who are present here today. Is that correct?
Chair, if the matter was deferred, then only members that sat in the first sitting of the application will be able to deal with when it came back to committee. Obviously, because you need to be present to hear all of the discussion. Obviously, members may change but I think the next application is next committee is the 28th of April, so all members would still be able to come. And the substitutions also carry on to the next meeting. But obviously, in terms of being quorum, it's quite a small number of members that's actually needed. But more widely about whether it be reasonable to vote on deferral here, you would need reasons for the deferral. As I said before, you do have issues here that the planning officer believes can be dealt with by condition. So I wouldn't be sure whether the members would be able to come up with a reason for deferral that wouldn't be akin to, disagreeing with the officer. And if you disagree with the officer that suitable conditions could deal with these matters, then, if you've got any evidence to put forward or on that basis, then that's something to consider. Thank you, Chair.
Shall I propose it and put it to the vote and let the members decide? Because as I say, I'm very uncomfortable with not knowing enough about this. Thank you.
You need a second.
Chair, could I just reiterate what Victoria said? We wouldn't have brought it to committee if we didn't think it was capable of making a decision, and none of the conditions that are proposed are particularly unusual. It's standard for us to condition a detailed drainage strategy. Our lead local flood authority is accepting of the proposals that have been put forward in terms of the lagoons and attenuation tanks and how water would be collected. And it's just the details that will be coming forward at condition stage.
Except nothing's been mentioned about whether the capacity of the lagoon is great enough to take on the additional runoff of hard surfaces and downpours with the rain we've been having. It's that sort of detail that's lacking.
I believe that's all been assessed as part of the details submitted with the application and the assessment by our drainage and lead local flood team.
It'd be nice to have seen it written down, just like with the other things. It would be nice to have actually seen the statements that these have been considered.
And reports have to be of a sort of relatively finite length. They can't cover everything in the exact amount of detail that you may, and you are able to come, to ask questions in advance of a committee meeting once you've read the papers if you have any detailed questions that haven't been covered. But, you know, we, as in planning officers and all the specialist teams, are satisfied that the conditions that are proposed, that have been put forward by those specialist teams, are acceptable to deal with the detailed design work that's still to be carried out. The principles are accepted, it's just the detailed design work and calculations that we need details on.
Well, I suppose the offer still stands. I'm happy to propose, colleagues happy to second, and then leave it to the vote and see. But I would like, you know, if the conditions are there and they've all been discussed, then surely they could easily be brought into another committee meeting in April.
I understand, officers, you know, you've seen it, you've seen that information. I can understand that, and you're saying that we could have asked that information beforehand, but it would have just been nice to have that in the report, that's what we're saying. So we then, not the same, we've got it then and we've seen it and we're going to vote on it, you know what I mean? So I'll second that, Barbara.
So the drainage strategy has been produced, but it's the calculations that would come as a result of this, as this condition. And our drainage officers are satisfied with that approach. The principles, the theory, the way the site will be drained, and then it's just the final calculations that will be submitted.
Yes, Vicky.
Chair, I'd just like to be clear about, I think you've got a proposal and a seconder here for a deferral. What I'm not entirely sure of myself is what the reason for the deferral is and what information specifically would need to be provided in order to reconvene the committee. Because at the moment there is you obviously mentioned quite a few different conditions with information to be submitted later. So it would just be sort of a good idea if the proposal continues to just nail down exactly what members believe is not available to them right now, that means that they're unable to make a decision on the application before them. Thank you, Chair.
Well, clear that the one that Barbara has consistently flagged up is to do with drainage and the attenuation tanks and their ability to hold water back from the Blackburn Brook. But do we have to list all of them now? Or does the proposer and seconder have to make sure that they're listed now? Or can the vote be taken and then they be added to?
Sorry, Chair, could you repeat that, please?
I've picked up on at least one where more information is being requested by Barbara and Gary in relation to water attenuation and drainage and the potential impact on the Blackburn Brook. There are others, but do they all have to be listed ahead of the vote to defer, or can they be listed after the vote? Because the vote may not go through.
Thank you, Chair. In order for the vote to be carried out, members need to know what they're voting for. And my view would be that if a deferral is something that members are interested in pursuing, it would be because they don't believe they have enough information to make a decision on this application before them today. So I know in previous applications, for example, what we've actually deferred for is to invite a member of the local lead flood authority to come and answer questions. In other matters, we've had a deferral for further speed information to be brought before committee. So it's just in order to proceed with the vote on deferral, then members need to know what information they believe is missing. That means that they're unable to make a decision today. Obviously, going back to what I've said before about awards of costs, you know, a risk of cost is not a material consideration for you, but you do need to give consideration as to whether you've got the evidence to substantiate any potential reason for refusal. Equally, whether you've got any evidence to substantiate the reason that you're proposing to defer. Obviously, officers believe these can be dealt with by condition. So you just put your mind to whether you've got any evidence on which to sort of take forward a reason for deferral or potential reason for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
I would, before we go on to Barbara and possibly Gary to list those items if they wish to, the applicants could go to the independent inspector if this committee ultimately refuses the application, and they could also do it possibly on grounds of non-determination. So at which point that would depend on whether our ask or the committee's ask for additional information is considered reasonable or not.
That's right, Chair. And one of the ambitions of the cost regime is to make sure that planning authorities make decisions without unavoidable delays. And as members will be aware, we did have the previous request for further speed data, I believe at Manchester Road, where that was then appealed for non-determination and costs were awarded. Thank you, Chair.
So, Barbara, Gary, what do you want to do?
I think it's been proposed. It was asked for by the Sheffield Northern Wildlife Trust to have it deferred. They got issues about the fact that there isn't a proper assessment of the effect on the ancient woods about all these other conditions. And I think I'd like the committee to vote on whether to defer it until this information is through. And if they say that the committee votes against it, I'll accept that and then just vote on the main proposal. Whether Gary agrees, I don't know.
Yes, Barbara, I agree with you.
So,
Chair, I think you had originally had a deferral that concentrated on drainage. Now you've got a deferral that seems to be mentioning the ancient woodland and other conditions. I'm not clear, if you take a vote now on deferral, exactly what information would be required in order for officer to bring the matter back to committee. But obviously, if you believe that you understand exactly what's required as part of the proposal, then obviously you can take forward the vote. Thank you, Chair.
I think it was for this first of all, a more detailed analysis of the effect of the pollutants on the surrounding area and the ancient woodlands as suggested by the Wildlife Trust, as well as the drainage, which is my particular concern. So on those two things then, okay, more information on those two aspects.
Still not sure what more information it is than what we have already, and in relation to other applications that we take where hard standings go down and you have developments. Thinking of the Aldi site on Penistone Road North.
Right. Last time when there was a deferment, in the intervening time, huge improvements were made to the drainage specified, and what was passed was acceptable, and that was in a very, very short time. So basically, I'm not an expert on that. I do know that there are problems with the Blackburn Brook further down. Any development causes more problems. The fact that the runoff water has got to go into lagoon, of which the capacity, if the lagoon was designed maybe 10 years ago for the original site, is that capacity sufficient for the increased rainfall we have now, considering so much is a hard standing? So all I'd like is information about whether the lagoon has enough capacity so that it will not overflow, spill and damage the surrounding area. And when it comes to the comments, it was actually in this report as well about the Wildlife Trust worried about the fact that there wasn't a proper assessment of the effect of some of the pollutants on the wood. I know it was addressed by Sarah in saying that this doesn't apply because they're so many metres away, but that was asked for, and considering that we've got heavy goods vehicles which produce a lot of particulates, those particulates go somewhere, and my original concerns was if they're all in the runoff, you said that they would be contained and could be separated out, but obviously they're also airborne as well, and if they're in the surrounding area and people who are knowledgeable about the effect of this on the oncology are asking for it, then on those two things, if the committee say that a deferment is not necessary, they've got the information, I can accept that. But they're the two things that I think are pertinent to this, to this sort of application. And if other people don't think so, that's absolutely fine.
And it's also the mouse and birds, that's all we're saying, isn't it? I know we've had a piece for birds, but I think we need to have the bats as well. You know, so that, all that information is not here.
Sorry, is this on the proposal, Mary?
I'm just totally confused about what we're going to be voting on. We seem to have gone from once a couple of specific things to quite broad issues, so I don't know what I'm going to be asked to vote on.
If I could mention a point of order, if this is going to be proposed, we should, those who are not in agreement with it should be allowed to speak against it as well.
That's a good point. Mark, Henry.
Based on what Councillor Whittaker has just said, you know, the calculations for the volume of water that has to be dealt with during a 30-year and 100-year rain event is a well-established methodology. I've got no reason to doubt that that methodology hasn't been followed in the drainage assessment that I'm looking at, and that our officers aren't aware of that. So I think we'd be on very thin ground deferring it for that, because there are a lot of other reports where it's referenced in the officer report, and there's much more detail available in the full reports, which are publicly available on the planning portal. So I'm sorry, Councillor Masters, I don't have a problem with the calculations they've done for the drainage, and I wouldn't be supporting a deferral based on that.
What, do you want to state your
yeah,
objection to the deferral?
We're called here into this committee room to make decisions about things, and there seems to be a bit of a tendency to kick cans down the road and defer, and so often we're heard about deferrals. We do have a Department of the Environment who can be monitoring any pollution coming out of being dumped in this river. You know, people can draw the Department of the Environment's attention to keep an eye on any pollutants that come out. But I've no particular reason to believe that a heavy load of pollutants are going to come out of there. And quite on the contrary, this is a transition point to net zero. It's something we want, not something we should be discouraging, kicking down the line. We need this facility. So I'll certainly be voting against that motion.
I think, Andrew, I was mindful that you had your hand up before this proposal came along, so I don't know whether you wanted to say anything at this point.
Well, I mean, very briefly, if colleagues want to defer it, happy to do that. I mean, clearly there are questions about this, and you know, we've heard that there's a proposal to defer it, and I will vote to defer it. I mean, I think there's questions in terms of the, as we say, about the drainage, about the biodiversity, about the impact on the woodlands. I was going to make some wider comments. I'll just make them very quickly now, just to say that this was a really ugly site when it was coal workings, and clearly this is one of those sites where nature has retaken a foot, and you know, whatever application came forward for employment land, we would have to take on board that the changes. The point I was going to make was the straightforward one in terms of IB8, which I know is a long time ago in terms of the UDP, but where we have employment land, we should be looking to come up with applications that have a significant number of jobs, and I think that's as big a challenge as anything else with this application. That was all I was going to make, but I'm happy to vote in favour of the deferment. Thank you, Chair.
Shall we just take a vote on whether members are minded to defer, and then we can move on?
Chair, yeah, I think it may be sensible to get proposed and seconded to vote on to defer on the basis that members don't have enough information on which to make a decision, and then if that vote is successful, then discuss the reasons for the deferment and vote on those as well. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, can I see a show of hands for those members in favour of deferral? Can I see those against? Thank you. No, the motion to defer was defeated. But thank you for bringing it to our attention and as a possibility. I think we do have to move now to members' comments on how we feel about this application. So, does anyone want to speak? Henry.
You know, the loss of habitat is regrettable. Potential damage to the brook, should the drainage not be appropriate, is regrettable. Loss of views for the surrounding environment is regrettable, but we really, really need more transitional infrastructure. So on balance, I'll be supporting this.
Thank you, Henry. And Gary.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's well known that HGV drivers, this is for vans first of all, up and down the country, where they're missing out on facilities. They can't get a shower, toilet facilities. They just pull up in lay-bys and things like that. So when I first heard this were coming along, I thought, oh great, they've got a facility here, you know, but it's hand washing, toilets, and that's all. And there's no long term, there's no long stay facility neither, which is a shame. I thought they could pull up, have the best respite, ideal straight off a motorway on an industrial site once before. You know, I thought this has got all the tick boxes for it, but when you read into it all, it's not gone far enough. And there's just so much what's not in here. It's all down to guesswork and then leaving it to someone else. And we, as planning members, have got to show that the voters that we are knowing every side and what's going to happen on that side. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Gary. I have to say I'm going to be supporting this application. I believe as a country we are behind in our transition with moving to net zero, and that having proper facilities so that HGVs can be charged up so that they can continue on journeys. That we actually have quite a good location that is pretty central in the country, and if it's going to work anywhere, I would expect it to work at a site near to Sheffield. I do think the problems of Blackburn Brook they're not going to go away, but this site has attenuation measures in place and an additional lagoon from what I can see on here to hold water back. But it's been in the nature of other developments that have probably put undue pressure on that brook and caused flooding. And I think the measures being put in place here will not add to that problem. So I will be supporting this application. Okay.
Sorry,
Douglas.
Yeah, I'll just say a word about it too. Just hearing what you said, recalls that quite a few years ago now it was proposed to have a hydrogen refuelling station for HGVs in Sheffield. Partly because we've got the technology in a firm in the city to develop those hydrogen production facilities. And as you said, it's very central. And that never happened. So, but I agree, this is, an important transition. If we, the idea of battery-operated HEVs was unthinkable a few years ago. It is there now. It's, a really important step if we're serious about dealing with the climate emergency, which is something that we've signed up to. So, as I say, reality is, it's just off the motorway. There is limited transport there between the motorway junction and this site. It is a massive industrial estate. And it's right next to the DPD depot right at the back, and that other massive warehouse next to it. If you're going to have it somewhere, that's a good site for it. What we haven't said is that one of the welcome is upgrading that cycle route to actually make it passable on a normal bike, because actually the number of people who go up and down that route to Chapeltown is potentially significant. And I'm also pleased to see that we haven't talked about this, but the traffic regulation order that's trailed there as part of the conditions. And Sarah showed us that slide earlier on of the DPD vans parked on the pavement and across the cycleway, which happens all the time up there. Possibly it's where they train drivers to park on pavements across the city. I don't know. But actually having that regularised will be a real benefit there for people going through there. So I think it is something we need to bite the bullet on. As Henry has said, we've had and have raised many concerns about the ecology and about the flood risk management. And I think we have to recognise as a committee that we actually delegate a lot of the more detailed decisions to officers, as we do in all council functions, but in this case through the conditions there. Someone say thanks for helping formulate some of the additional conditions to address the concerns that I think we all collectively contributed to. And I think those will strengthen the case there. Obviously, for us sitting around the table today, we don't know exactly how those conditions are going to work out. And it's something that we will have to look at, and that is the nature of delegating decisions. So, on that basis, I think that we can firmly support this proposal as being a major step towards dealing with the climate emergency, whilst doing a little bit better to deal with nature recovery, even though we've expressed that there are some quite major concerns, and we'll expect the officers to do whatever they can to mitigate against those. Thanks.
Thank you, Douglas. Richard.
A brief comment, Chair. I mean, I just think it's a wasted opportunity. It's designated employment land. I understand from the site visit the number of employees will be somewhere 2 handfuls, 10 maybe, something like that. Considering that the city is currently embroiled in serious discussions about releasing Greenbelt for employment sites, this seems to be a wasted opportunity. So I'm in two minds.
It does create employment, but not as much as we would like to see. I think that's the difficulty.
If it was housing development density, we wouldn't be going with it, would we?
How far away from the motorway would you like to see a site like this, an application like this to be planted? This site is very close to the motorway, and that is one of its key advantages. You wouldn't want it halfway down the parkway or halfway down the A61 from Chapeltown going towards Sheffield. Okay, can we move to the vote then, please? And that's with the 2 conditions that have been added in relation to the Skylarks and habitat management, yes. Okay, can I see it by show of hands, all those in favour of this application? And can I see those against? Yeah, that motion was carried. The application has been granted. Thank you all very much for
subject to legal agreement. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Can we move now to item 8, record of planning appeals and submissions and decisions. That's on page 61 of the agenda. Has anyone got any comments? Members happy to note the report? Yeah. Thank you, members. And the date and time of the next meeting will be on, this is item 9, on Tuesday, the 28th of April at 2 p.m. back here. So thank you all very much this afternoon.